What challenges does race play in overcoming sexual brokenness? And this is like two-part question. And then also, how does it interfere with safety in a group and a person's recovery and healing?
It's a loaded question. So first off, I'm going to do my best to try to capture what I think are some important things to bring up. Uh, for me, race played a role in sexual brokenness because there is a stigma and a social issue in our world of Black individuals not having community. Because of history and everything that Black people have gone through in America, isolation is prevalent. Not having people to look up to speak to, is common. And so I found that I had many unanswered questions. Not to mention my mother is, she's actually biracial too, but she comes off as a white woman. So I'm, a child with brown skin and curly hair in a family that doesn't quite look like me. And so, yeah, I just felt like I was already at a disposition for sexual brokenness because I didn't have those safe spaces to process things. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, that is, like my wife said, that's a loaded question. As far as challenges that race plays in overcoming. I guess to look at it in a couple different ways. One, from like a group's perspective, or like in that kind of context, like representation is a big thing, and not seeing something or someone that looks like you is like you don't like that feeling of like, you don't understand. And so with that, like there's another layer of shame that you end up wearing. It's like, man, I already don't feel good enough because I already feel like I don't fit in. And now I don't feel like I don't fit in with my own pain and trauma that has came to be sexual brokenness. And so that's a challenge. But two, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna speak on on behalf of all Black people. But one thing I can observe within our culture is that like two things that we don't necessarily talk about that often is money and sex, especially in like Black church. Like tithes is always like, oh, it's the greedy pastor is gonna use, right? But even sex, because there's so many things that come with that, so many different conversations. Like if you do talk about that, that means you have to face the things that are behind that door. And so I've seen that within our community and even specific within my home that I had to learn a lot of those things from other places or a lot of from other people. And so
Right.
we weren't resourced well. I wasn't necessarily resourced well on how to understand one, trauma, and two, how does the trauma from my race also play a fact in how it shows up in sexual brokenness. And
Yeah,
so,
you're also with race and sexuality, because that's a big correlation we're making right there, is what is being modeled to you. What are you, because as a child it's like more is caught than what is taught. So like in my home, it was domestic violence. And what did that teach me about, being a brown family? What did that teach me about, not feeling safe? And then how that played a role in how I grew up and what I believed about myself. Making poor decisions out of that, poor sexual behavior decisions, because I'm, like my mom was treated like a victim, so I guess I'm a victim. So that really was like a common message in my early high school years and even into my 20s. It's just like this victim role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does. So when you're in group, one thing that I have had to work through, and now I'm more vocal about it, is if you're finally being vulnerable and saying, because my childhood was, kids would call me the N-word, and I don't want to sit by the Black girl at just young ages. So it made me feel like, oh, I want to blend in. I don't want to draw attention to myself. I want to be basically as white as I can be so that I can have these kids like me, these boys like me, which led me down the path of like even, sexually acting out because I just wanted to be accepted, even though sometimes these are the same boys making racist jokes about me. But I thought that was kind of all I would get, because hearing from my mom and aunt who are in their 70s and
Yeah.
grew up, you know,
Right.
and they're dark or black, they're like, white people, you know, if you have a white husband, then it'll be better for you because your kids won't be so dark. And so I'm like, kind of almost idolized white people. And then in my head thought, okay, I'm lower because I'm not a white person. And what that did was just created a bunch of identity crises
Yeah.
that led into sexual crisis. And when I finally started processing it out loud, I started it with just friends and people I knew. Some of the comments were so, it's almost like, you know, institutional trauma, but in that sense where you finally decide to start talking about it. And it's like, well, you're not even that black, so why are you upset?
Yeah.
Or you're not even, which is so like,
Yeah.
you don't say those
Yeah.
kinds of things. Or, you know, are you sure that that's what they meant because you're so pretty? Or, you know, just minimizing what I
Yeah.
experienced, or that never happened to you and people weren't that bad. And I'm like, no. And then I would say, I literally grew up in an area where there'd be signs on the tree that say, get out of these trees, N-word.
Yeah.
And,
Oh,
you know, and it's like, oh, we didn't realize
Yeah.
it happened to you, but still, that's not for you. That's, you're not,
Yeah.
they're not targeting that toward you. And so those kind of comments, when somebody is finally ready to say something in group and they're sharing maybe their trauma story, their traumas of infringement and abandonment, or they're going through their timeline or even their arousal, whatever it
Yeah.
is, to just listen. And if it's painful for them, validate that and say, I am really sorry you had to go through that. Don't try to excuse it away or get defensive or
That's
anything
so
like
good.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And even to that, like thinking about like with trauma, we carry that wherever we go. Like that's oftentimes the lens that we view things. And so thinking about a black person, we've experienced like racism. So already the feeling of like, I don't fit in, I don't feel safe, that you have that element coming into a room for a group dynamic is like, can I really be my authentic self in this space? Because one, talking
So
about
good.
porn, masturbation, unwanted sexual behaviors, betrayal trauma is already uncomfortable. So having to take that risk of putting it out there, but two, like having the courage to say, man, I've been rejected by people that may look like you, that don't look like me, that are in this room, but can I feel safe with my brokenness here?
Yeah.
Is the extra layer that I've experienced, not only just in groups, but like going to church or working anywhere. It's like, can I be myself? Like,
Your antenna is always up, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like you're all
always
hyper vigilant.
assessing the
Yeah.
room. I still do that to this day.
Yeah.
Like, okay, am I safe here? I'm in Idaho. I'm in a gun store. That may be controversial too. And I'm like, okay, all these white guys with guns, are they friendly, like-minded, just people that like to go out and shoot, or are they like racist? Because I've experienced something from people that look like this before. But you're constantly just scanning and being overly friendly, and you know.
Oh
so,
yeah, there's a hyper awareness of your surroundings, but it's kind of funny that we have like what you're talking about. It's funny that we hyper focus on our surroundings, but we tell lies about who we truly are.
Yeah.
And then we end up hyper focusing on what is not true about
Yes.
ourselves.
It just messes up your identity.
Oh, it's so
Which
bad.
then-
And we rank
yeah.
ourselves every time we enter a room. Where am I here? Oh, I'm at the bottom. These people don't look like me. I'm going to minimize myself. I'm going to minimize my story.
Or I have to prove myself.
Yeah. And so
Mhm.
that can really be damaging.